What a snowfall. Oh, my goodness. I hope you're all safe. That's the main thing. I hope you're not driving. And if you are driving, be very careful, please. But for those of you who are snowbound, well, hang out with me. Mafia masterpieces, the Godfather Trilogy. How can you go wrong? Most guys, at the very least, know about the Godfather Trilogy. In fact, they've used phrases: keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I remember hearing that since I was a kid before watching The Godfather. Um, I think The Godfather 3 gets a bit of a bad rap. I think it was a victim of its own success. Much like The Many Saints of Newark, Paul McCartney's first album, whenever you come from an iconic situation, there is bound to be a letdown. I always believed that The Many Saints of Newark, which was the movie years after The Sopranos, depicting life before The Sopranos characters were adults and how they got to where they got to, uh, it was a victim of its own success. It couldn't match up to The Sopranos. I think if that movie stood on its own, you would have had to tweak it a bit because no one would know why you are setting up these characters to go toward the future. It would have been a better movie. Like The Godfather 3, if the basic premise, which it was Vatican corruption and Michael Corleone trying to legitimize his family. After all, he had been talking about that for 25 years, 30 years. Then we could have got on board maybe. And I think if the late, great Robert Duvall was involved in the project, it probably would have been better because there would have been more screen time for Robert Duvall. If they were going to pay him what he wanted to get paid, and ultimately that's why he didn't join the cast. I think Al Pacino was making 4 or 5 times more than he was, and he just wasn't on board, and I don't blame him. You can bet if they were paying him that money, he would have had a very, very dramatic part in the whole bordello. So, The Godfather 1, The Godfather 2. The Godfather 2 was the first sequel ever to be numbered 2. Generally, they would change the name of a sequel. And the reason why they wanted it Godfather 2 is they were afraid people would think, "Oh, I saw that movie already," when in fact they hadn't. So they put the numeral 2 there. First time it was ever done and successfully done. The Godfather 3 was a totally different movie because The Godfather 1 and 2 were continuations. Godfather 3 stood on its own. Now, you shouldn't call it a Godfather trilogy, really. And now this is 35 years, 36 years, going on 36 since The Godfather 3 was released in 1990, Christmas. Now, despite all these movies melding in, there's an argument that it really isn't a trilogy at all. It's an award-winning series. It tells the story of a crime boss, Michael Corleone, and his movements within the Corleone family. It goes back to his father's days of getting introduced to a life of crime. But the first 2 movies consistently find themselves at the top of the lists when you're dictating the greatest movies of all time. The third isn't really loved. Now, it's iconic for the rich atmosphere, the resolving of the story, but the storytelling's different. The method of storytelling is a bit different, and I think that's why it's looked at a little less favorably. Now, the reason why The Godfather and the sequels are so undisputably beloved, uh, because of their importance in the history of films, right? Countless films today are adored because of the groundwork that Francis Ford Coppola, more than 50 years ago, laid. Um, and The Godfather's overshadowed every other crime movie in its era. It mastered the genre, and that has really never been replicated. Much like the Beatles mastered the pop rock and roll genre of the 60s, no one really came that close. It was among the first movies that ever told an epic story among a storyline of three films, and it achieved it. And the result is very different than the trilogies that you see today. Now, it's really an epilogue, okay? The series consists of three separate movies, one single story, pretty much. Um, there's only one film known as The Godfather, and that's parts one and two. The epilogue, or Coda, the death of Michael Corleone, that stands on its own. And they changed the title of the final installment to lend itself more to the trilogy because it wasn't getting the love. And they felt, well, if we mention Michael Corleone's name, it will continue the saga. I don't know if that worked because everyone had seen it already. You know, if you listen to an album 20 times and then someone says, no, it's really good, you kind of you've voiced an opinion on it. You've come up with your own opinion. But from a narrative perspective, it makes sense that The Godfather is considered one story and its epilogue. The first two have much more in common than the third, both in the setting, the characters. Um, and maybe that's why the third felt so separate, very underwhelming in comparison. The Godfather 3 didn't live up to expectations. People had been waiting, right? 16 years. Uh, Audiences, I think, were hoping to find a third part of the story reality. And I think Coppola just gave you a glimpse of what was happening afterwards. You know, as soon as you see Michael Corleone worn down and beaten from a life of crime and ill, the menacing look was gone. Now, there's plenty of debate surrounding this. And that makes the series better that people talk about it. But The Godfathers 1 or 2, which one is better? Merging them into a single storyline makes it more cohesive on its own. The final movie is a little disappointing. The first two movies share a lot of thematic material, character development. You're growing with them, the complex storylines, and it always seemed kind of senseless to separate them because they melded into one another. Seeing Connie become so defiant in Godfather 2, where she was such a dutiful housewife, getting abused and one a meek. She was almost like the character in Rocky when you first met her, very quiet, and all of a sudden became a very strong woman. So when Coppola decided to label The Godfather 3 as the epilogue, it was interesting. It wasn't intended to be a huge epic like 1 and 2 were. Just an exploration of the characters after the main story. What happened to the characters? That's why it's much slower, much less intense, because you're not trying to achieve the same purpose. At least Coppola, I don't believe, was. There are still plenty of issues. You can't wave away with a magic wand. But that's what makes it fun. And because of 3, Godfather 4 was less likely to happen. And the story had already been completed, evidently. There were discussions in the 90s, around 95, surrounding the possibility of a 4th Godfather movie, but the project didn't go ahead. It was considered unnecessary. And the poor reception of the 3rd movie, I think, deterred the studio from making an enormous commitment of finance to it. Now, audiences since then have debated, I think, whether a 4th movie would have been a good idea. But Coppola dispelled it. It wouldn't make sense because it had been wrapped up for over 30 years, the story. And if you never considered 1 and 2 to be sequels in the first place, too much time had gone past, you know. It was always intended to be a single story. The epilogue had been completed. There's nothing more to be added to the project. Let me just see. I'm getting a shout out to my friend Mike Massa, who came back from Florida and didn't bring sun. So it's a true work of art. It's a masterpiece. And it probably shouldn't be expanded just for the sake of expanding it. It's one of the most iconic films and film franchises in cinematic history, right? Based on a 1969 novel by Mario Puzo. And you explore each dynamic within their own context. Outstanding performances, direction, the path, the depth, the betrayal, the power, the morality within the mob world. The first 2 films are widely regarded as some of the greatest films ever made. But you look at it and you say, well, okay, how did this all come about? What was the timeline? Where did one character meet another? Well, it really follows the highs and lows of a fictional character. The character happens to be a family, the Corleone family. Patriarch Vito rises to become a major figure in the Cosa Nostra. They couldn't use the word mafia in the first 2 movies. His youngest son, Michael, becomes his successor and attempts to expand the empire and does a good job until times change. Now, the timeline can get confusing because there are so many parallel shots in Godfather 2 that make it both a prequel and a sequel to the first movie. The first movie, you actually go back before the first movie in 2 with flashbacks, so you kind of get a little discombobulated there. Now, the first 2 installments are generally considered the best. Like I said, the third, the recut version, is better than many mob movies that came out in 2020, but it's not quite the first 2. Now, in 1901, Vito becomes an orphan after the mob boss in Italy kills his brother because the father would not relent to paying protection, and kills the mother as well when she goes and pleads not to hurt the youngest son. And the youngest boy, Vito, they put him on a donkey, they hide him, and they get him on a boat, and he goes to America. Now, it's a sad note in that small Sicilian village of Corleone. The mob boss, John Ciccio, he refused to call him daddy, evidently, Vito's father. He wouldn't pay tribute to him. And Paolo, who was Vito's older brother, tries to get revenge, and he's murdered during the funeral procession. Now, Signora Andolini, which is Vito's mother, takes Vito to see the mafia boss to beg for mercy. But Don Ciccio refuses, reasoning that Vito would seek revenge when he becomes an adult. At that time, Vito seemed very dim-witted, didn't talk much, and she can't reason with him. So she puts a knife to the throat of the boss. Vito escapes. She's shot by one of his bodyguards. Vito boards a cargo ship full of immigrants heading toward America. He can't speak English. And he's renamed Vito Corleone because they're asking him his name, but they saw he was from Corleone on the name tag. So an immigration clerk labeled him Vito Andolini from Corleone. Now, the events happen in The Godfather 2, enlightening the audiences about the childhood misfortunes that shaped Don Vito's life. How did he get to this place? The first movie introduced the character. No backstory. You didn't know how Vito got there. And it gets handled well in Godfather 2. The major revelation here is that if there weren't any clerical errors, it would have been the Andolini crime family. And what went on in Sicily appeared to have influenced Vito to be more compassionate, more protective of families. He was much more compassionate than Michael. Whether it was his own family members or real family members. He always doled out ultimate punishment for crimes committed against family members. He tries to be a good father. And he ensures that his children get the parental love that he missed out on because he was a young boy. He was probably 9 or so when he comes, and he doesn't have a father or mother. So from 1901 to 1925, you kind of see him growing up in Little Italy. He's taken in by the Abbandando family in Little Italy, Manhattan. He becomes very close with the family's son, Genco, who becomes his consigliere. And when he turns 18, he marries Carmela, a Sicilian woman. Interestingly enough, Chase loved The Godfather and Carmela Soprano, right? Use the name. He later loses his job at Abbandano's grocery store because the father's intimidated by Signor Fanucci, Don Fanucci, who forced him to employ his nephew. And he was the local crime boss, Fanucci, although they find out he really took it upon himself to be that. So desperate for money, Vito starts hijacking garment trucks with Clemenza, who he meets. Now, Fanucci learns of their lucrative operation, and he demands that they wet his beak, so to speak, giving him his tribute. Vito was unwilling to part with the money that they worked hard for, and he waxed Fanucci because he realized through people in the neighborhood that knew that he really wasn't a well-connected mob boss. He was just a local padrone, so there wouldn't be any payback. And it earned Vito a lot of respect. So he takes over the neighborhood pretty much. He starts an olive oil importation business, Genco Pure, with his friend Genco Abbandando. And it's later used for illegal operations. So Michael and Connie were the lucky children because they came into the world after Vito had established himself. In 1922, Vito decides to visit Sicily. He wanted his children to see his heritage. He locates and kills Don Ciccio and the people who were sent to murder him as a child. He and his partner Tomasino then approached the aging Don Ciccio after killing the bodyguards. And it was under pretense for Don Ciccio to give them blessing for an olive oil business. And he reveals who he really is. He goes close to him, and you can see the old man at this point doesn't know for sure who that is, Andolini. Vito stabs him, goes to Sicily, and they come back. Connie's born in 2023. So The Little Italy years really show how fate can really shape your life. If Vito hadn't lost his job, he probably would have been a decent law abiding citizen, feeding his family through a legitimate job. He was kicked into a corner and he couldn't step away from crime at that time. Now, he had the option of living with sadness, but Vito acts. He has his family at best interest at heart and he wants to make money. So, from an entertainment perspective, the Little Italy years are gold, pure gold. The image of Vito shooting Fanucci 3 times with a muffled pistol around a towel, most fans have that engraved in their mind. Vito's hopping on rooftops as he pursues Fanucci before killing him. And how young Vito, that role built Robert De Niro's career. Brando did a great job of an older, in his mid-50s, mumbling version of Vito. But De Niro owned the role and made him a star. Now, the glory years from 26 to 44, you're still in the Godfather movie, the first one. Vito's empire is growing during the years of Prohibition and the Great Depression, all the way through World War II. He adopts Tom Hagen. He later becomes the family's consigliere. He was a childhood friend of Sonny's who was left out to his own devices in the street. After the Pearl Harbor attack, Michael enlists in the military against the family's wishes. He earned the Navy Cross, and he's featured in Life magazine for his contributions to the war effort in the Pacific. So he's a star. So from 26 to 44, it's really the only peaceful era in The Godfather. And it's boring, kind of. Michael's war hero exploits are never shown. No other mob figures appear. The moves that Vito made to expand this empire to become the boss of bosses are never revealed. You never know. But some interesting details emerge. Vito bribed Michael's doctor to exaggerate his injuries so he could be discharged from the military. Kind of unpatriotic, right? So the mob war from 45 to 57. After Connie's wedding, the movie opens with Connie's wedding. Opens with Michael coming full fatigue, a full army dress. And all the major figures are in attendance. Michael arrives with Kay, a white bread. He's done everything not to be like the family. He's not wearing a tuxedo. He's sitting off to the side, doesn't want to be in family pictures. She's not an Italian. Went off to protect his country instead of his family. Wanted nothing to do with his father's life. Later in that year, the end of August was the wedding. Before New Year, during Christmas time, a war brews. Vito refuses Virgil, the Turk Salazzo's narcotics deal. Luca Brazzi's garroted to death. That's Vito's main henchman. And an attempt is made on Vito's life. It forced Sonny to take over the family. This is probably about a week before Christmas. Now, in one of the best movie scenes ever, Michael whacks Salazzo and the police captain, McCluskey, inside a restaurant to revenge the attempt on Vito's life. He then flees to Sicily to avoid the heat. He marries a beautiful Apollonia, who was about 19 at the time. Michael's about 25, I think. And she was killed in a car bomb when they learn of Michael's whereabouts. During this time, Sonny's waging war against all the Corleone family enemies, but he's eventually assassinated on the Jones Beach Causeway. Michael returns to America. He marries Kay, takes over as the Don, moves his operations to Nevada. He really wanted to set his sights on legitimacy. Vito dies of a heart attack. Michael orchestrates the baptism murders, wiping out the heads of all the New York Five families during the baptism of Connie's son, which he said he would stand up for, although by now he knows that her husband was the one that fingered Sonny for the Barzini people. He was the traitor all along, Connie's husband. Now, starting the trilogy with the war was a good idea. It got audiences really invested in the story. Halfway through the first movie, we see the enemies really ganging up on Vito. So we start rooting for Vito. So here is an antagonist who is becoming a hero to us. He might be a criminal, but he's our hero. He's tough. Bullets don't kill him. Only old age kills him. So Vito's financial success only increases. And the jealousy and social climbing around him really puts him a little too at ease. He's no longer distracted by making money, striking deals. And that's why he rejected Salazzo, a lucrative drug deal, but he didn't need the money at this point. He was the biggest godfather. It was relatively calm. There hadn't been a war. And why should he get involved in it? And he felt it would be the ruination of the mob. But there are consequences. Vito raised great children, if you call being gangsters great children. Sonny gets killed. And Michael pulls the pin on the grenade. Now, from 58 to 59, being at the top of the mob chain without any major competitors, the movie The Godfather 2 starts at the communion in 1958 of Michael's youngest son, Anthony, only son, Anthony. So an assassination attempt is made on Michael at his home in Tahoe. Now, he didn't think he had any enemies. He travels to Havana, Cuba, to discuss a business deal with Hyman Roth, who is really Meyer Lansky. And on New Year's Eve, he learns officially that his brother betrayed him, and that Fredo was instrumental on the property of letting Roth's people in. Now, I don't know if he knew it was going to be an assassination attempt, but they duped Fredo, saying that, you deserve more respect. Where Michael's being tough on a big deal, you could finally do something for yourself. Fredo felt he was passed over, and they used Fredo. In 1959, Michael survives being taken down by the government in a Senate hearing on organized crime. Kay later leaves him, and shortly after his mother's death, he whacks Fredo. So how different would this leadership have been when Vito vacated office? Right? Michael never intended to become a mobster. He wanted a good white-collar job out of Dartmouth College. And he wanted to fight. That's why he joined the army. So becoming a mob boss surprised us all. His reign is covered in large sections of The Godfather 2. Great leadership. Wiped out his enemies. People were afraid of him. But as people around him struggle and fall apart, Michael becomes a leader. He's a natural leader. He's in the army, wins a Navy Cross. He saves the family when they're trying to destroy the family with the assassination attempt on his father. He feels his hope in this world to get out of this mob world. But he made choices that affected his real nuclear family. And he was willing to make sacrifices, even his own brother, to protect his family. Right? So we go to 1979. That's where The Life and Death of Michael Corleone, the coda, Godfather 3, from 79 to 97. So when Michael finally keels over, he's probably about 76 or 77 years of age in that yard at the end of the movie. Now, very little is known about what happens from 59 to 97. The only thing I could tell you is when you see the last view of Michael sitting all alone after The Godfather 2, that's around 1968. That's about 9 years after the movie really had ended. When he's sitting, you can see he's a little gray if you look at the picture. So it's to be assumed that Michael was running the empire smoothly, right? Michael formed the Corleone group in part three, attempting to go legitimate, which he wanted to do and promised to Kay in the mid 50s. In fact, at Connie's wedding in 1945, he said, "My father's way of doing business is over, Kay. My father knows that." So he really wanted to become a corporation. And he was attempting to go legitimate by investing in the Vatican's Immobiliare deal. He takes on Sonny's illegitimate son, Vincent Mancini, takes him under his wing. Now, sometime between 79 and 80, Michael receives the Order of St. Sebastian from the Vatican. Another attempt is made on his life. Joey Zaza attempting to kill him, and the other bosses in Atlantic City with the helicopter assassination, which is really unbelievable. Michael suffers a diabetic stroke. He's diabetic. Vincent takes over on the condition that he ends his romance with Mary Corleone, Michael's daughter. You got a lot going on. Modern day stuff. During Anthony's opera, Anthony asked to be led away from the family. Michael releases him. He becomes an opera star. In Palermo, assassins who were targeting Michael accidentally kill his daughter Mary. Fast forward to 97, Michael dies quietly sitting in a Sicilian courtyard. What's the context here? You get older, you become wiser. After years of feuding, Michael realizes that even though there's a lot of money to be made in organized crime, he will never stop looking back. He's become stifled by the underworld. He lost Apollonia, was killed because of him, and now his daughter. He chooses to go legitimate. And many criminals try to go legitimate. But sometimes things go wrong before you make the switch. The Godfather 3 was more concerned with Michael's fight with internal demons than his fight with a related fallout with other gangsters. That approach made it an inferior movie. It's easy to understand why Michael had that thought process. He needed to protect his family. But you never come out the same when you choose some paths, because in the end, he died alone. And if you remember, he was sitting alone after The Godfather 2. Hey, Ira. Hey, Dave. So we look at that. Now, there are some things in The Godfather that I don't agree with. I was out in the street enough to know some people that know certain things probably wouldn't happen. There's no way Michael Corleone would let Carlo Rizzi hang around for 8 years. 1954 was when Michael took out the heads of the five families. It's May of 1958 when The Godfather 2 starts. Now, my question was, didn't anybody try to retaliate when he did this? My answer to you is go to The Godfather 3 when he's giving out all the envelopes at that meeting where he was to be assassinated. Who are all those mob guys? Those are the guys that Michael in 1954 worked with to put an end to an ensuing war. When he hit the heads of the five families, these were the guys in line to take over. And he probably said, "I'm going to put you in a deal. with casinos. I'm working on something. You're going to make millions of dollars. Let's stop the war. You guys will pick up the crumbs. I hit your bosses. Your turn to be bosses. We can go smooth. You could become multimillionaires with the deal. I'll share it. That's what he did. Bet you didn't think of that one. Sonny gets shot in 46, which means in 54, when he takes care of Carlo, he's been around 8 years. Carlo. You can't tell me Michael didn't know that Carlo, or had at least an inkling that Carlo was responsible. They checked phone records on Luca Brasi. They checked phone records on Paul Igato to see if phone calls that was cut out of the movie. That's how they knew it was Paulie who set up the old man. A lot of phone calls. You mean to tell me that they couldn't catch a phone call between Carlo? You mean to tell me no one ever saw Carlo? Michael was a very paranoid guy. You mean to tell me he never suspected Carlo? Meanwhile, he's nursing him to be his right-hand man? No. Michael just didn't decide on that day, you got to answer for Carlo, for Santino. He knew he fingered Sonny, but yet he had him around. So what would happen if the other families got strong and now he tries to take out Michael and become the boss because he's the underboss? Many people don't realize in Godfather 2, the Clemenza character was Frank Patangeli. Clemenza was supposed to be in that movie, but had won a Pulitzer, and he wanted someone to write all his lines, and the studio didn't go for it. 2 weeks before, they pulled him out. Patangeli was supposed to be Clemenza's character. Why would Patangeli, who we never heard of, take over Vito Corleone's house in Long Beach? Clemenza would have. That was Clemenza, Patangeli. Clemenza was the underboss. Fredo, in paper only, was the underboss. Fredo was a figurehead. Frank Patangeli was Michael's underboss in New York. Al Neri, pretty much, was Michael's underboss in Las Vegas. He was his personal Doberman. He was Luca Brasi, a modern day. So, yeah, I think The Godfather 3, when it set up how all those Dons made fortunes, that was probably the price that Michael paid for peace after hitting the Dons. I'll put you all and make you mega rich, and we'll have peace. I'll include you in everything. Michael became the boss of bosses because he was holding all their money. I don't believe Vito would have ever killed his son, Fredo, because you can't tell me that Vito didn't have an inkling that Carlo was bad. He knew at the very least Carlo was hitting his daughter. He knew that. Because Connie had gotten hit once before, and you can't tell me Santino didn't tell his father. But if you remember, at the table, when Connie gets loud and Carlo says, "Shut up, Connie. Stay out of it. Mind your business." That's what the mother tells Sonny. When you're married, it's your house. Vito probably felt that way, as much as it killed him. First of all, in the books, he didn't like Carlo. Carlo was a two-bit punk who was run out of Vegas, always getting in petty crime, and came to New York. He didn't like Carlo for his daughter. He was not happy about the marriage. That's why he never gave him anything important. If you remember, never discussed family business with him. Tom was a kid. He's not blood either. And Tom was trusted. Luca Brasi's not blood. He was trusted. Because they didn't use the word mafia in 1 and 2, being made didn't matter. But back then, Tom Hagen would have never been able to be made. He wasn't a full Italian origin. You never found out if Carlo Rizzi was made. I'm suspecting he wasn't. And one of the promises probably to him for ratting out Sonny was he'd become a ranking member with Barzini. Uh, hey, Craig, how are you? Just talking about The Godfather and the stuff that I don't agree with in the street. I'm curious if I was saying there's no way Michael would have ever he hit the bosses in 1954. Sonny was killed in 46. There's no way that Michael would have let Carlo Rizzi stay alive and close to him for 8 years, knowing Michael knew, at the very least, suspected that he was responsible for fingering Sonny. There's no way Michael would have let him that close to him. Michael killed his own brother, for God's sakes. You think he's going to let Carlo Rizzi be close to him for 8 years? I don't believe it. Michael killing Fredo. Right, he did. I don't know if he'd let him stay alive, though. And I also think in Godfather 3, when he has the meeting where he almost gets assassinated and is giving all those envelopes, in 1954 is when he hit all the bosses. The Godfather 2 starts out in 58. So 4 years had passed. That was the price for no war. Think about it, Craig. I know you'd understand this. He probably went to what was remaining of those families. And he said, it's a new era. The ways of doing things that your Dons did, no more. I'm invested. We're going to go legal. You're going to make millions of dollars, much more than you would have ever made under these Dons. What's done is done. We either rebuild or you know my power. You don't really have a choice. I think Michael shared in a lot of those Vegas deals with the other families. And that's why those guys, you even said, oh, I forgot. How much did you invest? I forgot. He put all those new guys that would have taken over those families into lucrative deals. And that's how Michael kept the peace for years. What happened was they wanted in on a Mobiliati. Like he put them in on the casino deals. He refused and they tried to kill him. But so Carlo was whacked in 54 when everyone else was getting whacked. So 4 years had passed when the movie opens up in 58 at Anthony's Communion. Now, Frank Patangeli was Clemenza. They just had to change the name because there's no way Frank Patangeli, you never heard of him. He's taking over Vito's house in Long Beach. No, that would have been Clemenza taking over that house. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll tell you another thing that was interesting, that they really hammer home, Craig, that Tom was not a wartime consigliere. Tom missed the hit on Sonny. Think about it. Tom missed the hit on Sonny. He almost got killed. Tom wasn't the wartime consigliere. And Tom missed the hit on his father. Tom was the consigliere when they tried to kill Vito and tried to kill Sonny and did kill Sonny. So Tom failed twice of seeing the big picture. How could Tom not think they were going to try to hit Sonny? Now, it's not his fault, but so they were still trying to. Right. I agree, Craig. I think he trusted him, but I think he was green. He didn't trust him streetwise. Totally correct. I think he loved him. I think he loved Tom. Now, another thing that I found out through a lot of research. Do you remember when he was being mean to Tom when he wanted to go after Hyman Roth? And he goes, Tom, if you're not with me, you could take your mistress and go to Tahoe or Vegas to run a casino. Remember when he seemed unhappy with Tom, like they were at odds? You know why? Tom was having an affair with Santino's widow. Tom was fooling around with Sonny's wife. It was never said in the movie, but that's why Michael had a hard on for him. And Michael was spying on him. How did he know that he got offered the job in Vegas? Someone ran and told Michael. Michael must have been keeping tabs on Tom. Michael was very paranoid at that point. He didn't trust anybody. Well, look, if your own brother inadvertently tried to have you killed, how are you going to trust anybody? Michael didn't trust anybody but himself. And look, Tom didn't see Michael Hyman Roth's move coming. And I'll tell you something, Craig, that people don't realize. I picked this out, and I actually went on a mob show, and they agreed with me, and they said, we never thought of this. Think of this. You know when you know Tom's inept? And I swear to you, I came up with this myself, and they had me on the show because of this. In the car, when Vito is half the man he used to be, he goes to that meeting for two reasons. One, to bring Michael home, but really to see who the traitor of the family was, who was behind the hit. That's what he really wanted to know, because he knew Tattaglia couldn't be behind the hit. He was too stupid. When they're in the car, Vito says to Tom, it was Barzini all along. And Tom says, you mean Tattaglia? And Vito says, no, Tattaglia could have never outfought Santino. It was Barzini. Tom missed that too. Tom thought it was Tattaglia. An aging, past his prime Don said, no, it was Barzini. So Tom missed that too. And you see that very early on in the movie. So they show you. And the show I was on said, yeah, that's true. Tom missed that. Vito was in that meeting, and all of a sudden, first of all, he goes into the meeting, Barzini's sitting at the head of the table. What does that tell you? Barzini's the now head of the mob. So soon as Vito walks in and sees the top chair is not there reserved for him, Barzini's the boss. That's how he knows it was Barzini. He sees Tattaglia looking over to Barzini every time he'd say something, like Barzini's giving him the go-ahead to talk. Tattaglia wasn't the guy, and Tom missed it. Tom was convinced it was Tattaglia. So, yeah, he lacked the street smarts, and he loved Vito to no end, Tom. He just didn't get it. Now, hard for me to believe that Tom wouldn't suspect Carlo. And David Chase brings a lot of that out in The Sopranos. Would Tony really save Christopher? Christopher's a flat-out heroin user. Knows he's going to get pinched. He knows he's a yayo. Feach Lamanna. Was Tony a rat? Tony set him up to go to prison. Was Tony a rat? Is that a rat move? Think about it. He ratted him out to the cops. Was Tony a rat? Well, it was either that or killing him. What probably would have been more honorable to kill Feach than to put him back in prison. And that was always the theme through The Sopranos. They never trusted a guy that didn't do time. Tony never did time. A lot of the higher-ups worried if Tony would ever turn. And Tony, in season 1, in the psychiatrist's office, says, I just want to get my family raised and make sure my son, then I don't care what they do with me. He said that. What does that mean? That could be taken as. So I think that a lot was left to the imagination with Tony Soprano. I think Chase did the same thing that happened in The Godfather. But Michael will kill Fredo, but keep Carlo Rizzi around for 8 years. who killed his brother. How could Michael be so sure that Carlo Rizzi wasn't involved with trying to take out Vito? Probably wasn't. How do they know that Paulie Gatto wasn't talking to Carlo? They checked Paulie Gatto's phone records. That was out of the movie. That's how they found out it was him. They traced the guy in the phone company, traced the phone records, and he was making a lot of calls to that family. I'm sure they checked Carlo's. Someone called Carlo's house and said it was a girlfriend and hung up. Wouldn't they think to check? There were a lot of things that didn't make sense. They made you think that Luca just walked into that office and went to turn. That was a bad mistake. Was Don Corleone really losing it? How could he think that they would really believe that Luca Brasi would all of a sudden want out of the Corleone family? That was an error. He was slipping Vito. Vito was slipping, and this is something that you don't know either. Barzini was the hit guy that tried to take out Vito. Vito got shot in the shoulder 10 years before. Barzini was the guy. And then Barzini turned on his own boss and took over the family. But Barzini was the shooter that tried to kill Vito. So Barzini never liked Vito. Yeah. Now, to be honest with you, Craig, I have a dear friend who off the air we'll talk about, who is a powerhouse. Grew up with him. And when he had a granddaughter, he teared up. Um, I've seen a lot of tough guys tear up, and they were real capable. Well, I know for a fact they were. So, but I agree with you. They put all these things in there where Tony had weaknesses. Tony, Tony didn't think things through. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. He didn't want to go to. I totally agree with you, Craig. I think that he feared it, and you can see before that or after that where they knocked Johnny Sack for crying. Remember? How could you trust him? What would they do to him in prison? Right. And interestingly enough, what was Tony in the death dreams? A salesman. Think that was a great take. You see, Craig, you know your stuff. Tony was always a salesman or a mason. Masonry work. Why? Because his grandfather came and built. He didn't speak English. He was a builder. Built the church that he showed Meadow. So Tony, in two dreams, one he speaks no English, and one he's a salesman. Think about it. You're right, Craig. Boy, we think on the same. Craig, I gotta. What was your mother's name? I'll tell you. um, yeah, they put all these things in. Now, if I'm a boss, I don't trust Christopher. I love Christopher, but I don't trust him. First of all, Christopher came and unloaded a gun in his car. He, you couldn't allow him to live after that. You couldn't allow it. You just couldn't. You look weak. See, the thing with The Sopranos, which was the greatest part of The Sopranos that I thought, Craig, Tony changed after season one. Tony was one of the guys. They were all his friends. Now he's their boss in season two. There's a big difference. He didn't have to be their boss in season one. He was just one of the guys. Come season two, they work for him. There's a big difference. I agree with you, Greg. And it's a hard decision. It's a hard decision, but he's putting everybody at risk. And I have to tell you, as much as Paulie put up with him and loved him, I think if they ever had a meeting and Tony is sitting with Silvio, Dante, and Paulie, who's an old timer, saying we have to get rid of Chris, they would have been on board. I don't think they would have loved the decision, but they would have been on board. Because the bottom line is no one wants to go to prison. And it's, Chris is in heroin. You don't know what he talks about when he's stoned. Another big thing also was you don't know what he told Adriana. She was an informant. I think in real life he would have been clipped over that. I think he would have been. I think he would have been clipped with Adriana, honestly. They both would have been clipped. I think Tony would have met both of them and said, we got to talk about this, and would have clipped them both. I don't. It was interesting that Silvio was the only one that could get close to her. That's why he drove her and killed her. Because if it wasn't Silvio, she would have called the FBI, and they would have came and scooped her up. If she calls the FBI, if it's anybody but Silvio, the FBI knows she's getting hit. Silvio, it was believable. Because she didn't look at Silvio as a hitman. That's why. But, yeah, I think Chris would have been hit. Certainly. And that's why they wanted her to bring him in quick. Because they were afraid to get hit. Yeah, Tony made a lot of mistakes. And Michael made mistakes. Michael, like his father. You wouldn't think that Joey Zaza would come after you again? Now, there were also scenes that were ridiculous in The Godfather 3. Here's a mob boss for 20 years, 25 years. And he says to Andy Garcia, you could have reasoned with them. You could have called the police. What mob boss is going to say, oh, Joey Zaza sent hitmen to hit? Yeah, you could have called the police. That's not being said. That's not being said. One of the greatest lines was when he says to BJ, and that's another thing. Michael comes to the wedding of Connie. Everything's opposite. No tuxedos, not sitting with the family, as a white bread future bride in Kay. Totally different than any woman there. Michael's attorney is George Hamilton. You can't get more white bread than that. You see the parallels with The Godfather when Michael didn't want to be part of the family, and now The Godfather 3 where he doesn't want to be part of the mob? A lot of relative facts there. I read. I have nothing better to do. I read into this stuff. I sit for hours thinking about this stuff. There were other things in The Godfather that didn't make sense. Supposedly, Michael was stopping Joey Zaza from moving up in the commission, and that's why he did it. He tried to kill Michael. He knows, Uncle Mike, he knows you're stopping him from rising up in the commission. But he gave Joey Zaza that territory. When Zaza says, they gave me New York and you approved the old Corleone territory. So Michael approved of Zaza taking over the Corleone interest in New York, but was stopping him from rising up in the commission. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Right? Why? So if Michael's out of it, how is he stopping him from moving up in the commission? So evidently Michael's word still goes. He's still the boss. He acts like he's not the boss. Michael acts a little pregnant, but Michael's still the boss. Joey Zaza said for the meeting, "You're my patron." He's your boss. Who else is the boss of the Corleone family? There's no one left. It's Michael. So anything that happens, evidently Joey Zaza's been handling. And Zaza probably felt, what do we need Michael here for? He's off trying to get medals from the Pope. I do everything. I should have the title. I should be the boss of this family. And that's what he was promised. Zaza was probably going to be the head of the Corleone crime family. And they used the excuse of him going with the Marbogliati as the reason to kill him. That he was being selfish. He wasn't looking out for his partners. There were guys in the mob. I knew one, let's say. He owns like 8 businesses and then just didn't want to be involved anymore. And they said, whoa, wait a minute. You made all this money with us. You own these businesses because of us. Now you just want to be legitimate? No, don't work that way. Michael couldn't have pulled out back then. He tried to separate himself as much as he could. Now let's look at, I'm on YouTube. Now let's look at Vincent Mancini. He was a hothead like his father. He was calculating like Michael. He had the empathy of Vito. Had all, and the stupid decision making like Fredo. He had all the traits. Now, could Michael have just made him the head without a commission approval? Well, the commission was dead. Think about it. You got to get a commission approval for that officially. But the commission was dead. They were scurrying. So evidently, Lucchese, who was the guy in Italy, was really the boss of the Sicilian Mafia. And Don Altobello, they never say it, but he was probably a zip. And he was the connection between Sicily. If you wanted to go real life, Frankie Calli, much younger version, would have been Don Altobello. I knew Frankie for years. He was about 7 years younger than me. He used to hang out on 18th Avenue. He was a good kid, Frankie. And knew all the Sicilians. Spoke Sicilian dialect. You would think he lived in Italy. And that's what Altobello was. He was the bridge, the American mob and the Sicilians. Altobello's tentacles reached far. So it was twofold because they were also going to be able to beat Michael Corleone of over $500 million. Think of that. If they get rid of Corleone, they beat him for $500 million. And that money would have been distributed amongst the people that were going to be taking over these families to rebuild. That's probably what it was. But there were some really good scenes there. Like, you should suffer for killing your brother. Michael would have never admitted that to a priest 25 years ago. A great scene when Connie says, let me see if I can find it for you. Connie becomes First woman boss. Connie became a very strong woman. This was a great scene here. I bet you never saw this either. This
I
little
respect what he's done.
watch this
Has not yet.
when he says,
On his face.
Zaza, you if this was I would have ripped your the old Michael comes back, your temper.
Michael!
Listen to what he says about Joey Zaza. He knows it's Zaza. I don't know why I'm freezing up here. And he says, Zaza, you deceitful. I'd like to blow all of you apart. Watch this.
I see how it is.
I don't know what he's doing. He isn't one.
This is the diabetic stroke.
I got my win back. I got it.
What the hell?
Run!
He starts screaming, Zaza, you deceitful. I'd like to blow all your heads off.
Thunder can't hurt! Harmless noise!
Right here.
Bullshit! Oh, you deceitful fuck! I'll come by!
I'd like to blow all your heads off. That's what he's going to say. The old Michael came out during the diabetic stroke. So you see that Michael still was the same guy. He tried very hard not to be. But he felt that his destiny was not to head the Corleone family up, but he had to save his family. He thought they were going to wipe out his whole family. And he chose his family over his own family, really. But look what his decisions. He never saw his kids. He got his daughter killed. Apollonia, I think, was 19 when he married her, and he really loved her. She got killed. One of the great lines in that also was when he says, I never saw him. You remember his father? You ever meet his father? Why would you say that? You don't know if he met you, Tom Hagen? Great lawyer. He didn't see him get ordained. I did. He loved Tom's son. They never tell you how Tom died. But Tom was offered like 20% of what Al was offered for that movie. That's why he didn't do it. I think he was offered what Diane Keaton was making. I think Pacino got $5 million to do that movie. But look, they're masterpieces. They are what they are. They're part of our history. And that great line, leave the gun, take the cannolis, was ad-libbed. That was ad-libbed, that line. The toll booth was on Flatbush Avenue, Floyd Bennett Field. They built that there. That's where that toll booth was. The house in Long Beach was Toad Hill, Staten Island. It was only a few blocks from Paul Castellano's house. And what they did was they took styrofoam brick. There was really like a 2-foot brick, and they took styrofoam, painted it, and made it large. It was supposed to be a compound where everyone lived there in Long Beach. There were like 5 different homes, and Tom lived in one of them. That's the way it was supposed to be. Great movie. So I hope we dissected it enough for you. Thank you, Craig, for coming in. I can't believe it, how bad it is outside. I got to get my car out. I'm going to have to hire someone to come plow the driveway. I have to teach this week. Everyone, God bless you. Stay warm. I hope you're okay. And I might come on tonight to say hi. Not sure. Well, we're all stranded. See you soon.